The wind that swept across the borderlands of the Arizona and New Mexico territories in 1882 did not just blow. It scoured. It carried the grit of 1,000 miles of sandstone and dry riverbeds, seeking out every gap in a window frame and every seam in a coat. It was a landscape of red earth and gray sagebrush, vast and indifferent, stretching out under a sky so blue it looked hard enough to chip a tooth on. The overland stagecoach arrived at the outpost with a groan of timber and the shriek of a metal brake against a wheel rim. It was late afternoon, perhaps 4 o'clock, though time seemed to lose its precision out here in the dust. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the mesas in the distance with strokes of violet and burnt orange. Eliza Hart stepped down from the coach, her leather boots sinking an inch into the loose dirt. Her legs trembled, not just from the 3 days of relentless rattling inside the wooden cabin, but from a cold that seemed to come from inside her bones. She was 24 years old, an age where a woman in the East might be considered dangerously close to spinsterhood. But here, she felt like a child lost in a cathedral of rock and thorns. She tightened her grip on her shawl, pulling it closer around her shoulders against the biting wind. It was wool, dyed a sensible dark blue, but it felt as thin as lace against the high desert chill. She looked around, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was the trading post at Red Rock Crossing. It was hardly a town. It was a collection of rough-hewn timber buildings huddled together as if for warmth, dominated by a large structure that served as a general store, post office, and saloon. A new set of iron tracks ran parallel to the road, the steel glinting coldly, marking the encroachment of the railroad that promised to change everything but had not yet brought civilization. "That is all of it, miss," the driver grunted, hauling a heavy leather trunk down from the roof of the coach. He dropped it into the dust with a heavy thud that made Eliza wince. "Thank you," she said, her voice sounding thin and reedy in the open air. The driver tipped his hat, climbed back up, and shouted to his team. The coach lurched forward, eager to reach a larger settlement before true dark, leaving Eliza standing alone beside her trunk. She looked toward the porch of the trading post. There were men there, men with faces weathered like old saddles, leaning against the wooden posts or sitting on barrels. They stopped their low conversation as the stagecoach pulled away, their eyes fixing on her. It was not a welcoming gaze. It was the look one gave to a new horse, checking its teeth and wind. It was a look of appraisal, stripped of manners. Eliza forced herself to stand tall. She was an educated woman. She was a nurse. She had taught children their letters in a crowded schoolhouse in Philadelphia. She was not a stray dog to be stared at, but her hands, hidden in the folds of her dress, were shaking. She scanned the faces, looking for the one description she had memorized from the letters. Tall, dark hair, a gentleman's coat, Mr. Harrison. He was supposed to be here. He had sent the money for the ticket. He had written with such kindness, such distinct politeness, about the need for a good woman to help him run his ranch and raise a family. None of the men on the porch looked like a gentleman. They looked like the land itself, hard, dusty, and dangerous. "Looks like another one," a man with a gray beard muttered, loud enough for his voice to carry across the yard. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Mail order bride, $5, says she is crying before sunset." "I will take that bet." Another man laughed, a younger one with a pistol strapped low on his hip. "Look at the chin on her. She is stiff as a board. She might last a week." Eliza felt the heat rise in her cheeks, burning despite the cold wind. She turned her back to them, facing her trunk. It was a heavy, battered thing of thick leather and brass fittings. It contained everything she owned in this world. Her 2 other dresses, her books, a small case of medical supplies, tinctures of laudanum, clean bandages, a glass thermometer, and willow bark. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was the packet her foster father had given her before he died. She placed a hand on the lid of the trunk, grounding herself. She would not cry. She had promised herself when she sold the last of her furniture to pay the debts that she would not cry over things that could not be changed. At the far edge of the trading post, where the shadows of the building stretched long and dark, a man was watching. He was not on the porch with the others. He stood near the corral where the horses were tethered, checking the cinch on a paint pony. This was Kai Bege. He was 28 years old, though his eyes held the weary depth of a man twice that age. He was Dine, one of the people. He wore the clothes of a scout canvas trousers tucked into high moccasins, a dark flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but he moved with a fluid grace that the heavy boots of the white settlers could never mimic. He tightened the strap on his saddlebag, his movements efficient and precise. He was not here to socialize. He was here to trade a few skins for coffee and flour, and to listen, always to listen. The wind carried many things, but rumors carried faster. He was looking for word of a family that had vanished from the reservation boundaries 2 weeks ago, a search that had so far yielded nothing but silence and hostile glares. He paused, his hand resting on the horse's warm flank, and looked across the yard at the woman standing by the road. She looked entirely out of place. Her dress was too fine, her skin too pale, her posture too rigid. She looked like a china doll placed on a rock slide. Kai had seen many like her in the last few years. Women coming west with heads full of romantic notions and pockets full of desperate hope. The land usually broke them, or the men did. He felt a familiar, dull anger stir in his chest. It was not at her specifically, but at the ceaseless tide of arrival. They kept coming, the trains, the coaches, the wagons, and every time they arrived, his world shrank a little more. A small movement near his leg drew his attention. Nijoni, his niece, peered out from behind the heavy wool of his duster coat. She was 6 years old, with eyes like obsidian and hair blacker than a raven's wing. She was supposed to be staying close to the wagon of the Mexican grandmother who sold tortillas and cornmeal by the stable. But Nijoni had the spirit of a coyote and the curiosity of a cat. The little girl was staring at Eliza. To Nijoni, the woman looked like something from a story. The blue of her dress was bright against the brown earth. The way the wind caught the ribbons on her bonnet fascinated the child. Nijoni took a step forward, her small boots crunching softly on the gravel. She pointed a finger. Kai reached out, his hand gentle but firm, and caught her shoulder. He pulled her back into the shadow of the corral fence. "Du agitida," he murmured softly in their tongue. "It is not for us." He knelt on one knee, bringing his face level with hers. "Stay close. Nijoni, the wolves have 2 legs in this place." Nijoni looked at him, then back at the woman. "She looks lost. Uncle—" "She is white," Kai said, as if that explained everything. "Someone will claim her, or they will not. It is not our business." He stood up, his body tensing as he scanned the porch. He saw the way the men were looking at the woman, and then he saw the way they looked at him when their eyes drifted his way. It was a different kind of hostility. For the woman, it was predatory lust and amusement. For Kai, it was a hatred that sat deep in the gut. He saw the paper tacked to the wall of the trading post, flapping in the breeze. It was a wanted poster. The face on it was drawn in crude ink, a Dine man accused of stealing cattle. The reward was $50. It did not matter that the man was likely innocent, or that the cattle had probably strayed. The reward was enough to make any man with a gun look twice at Kai. Kai adjusted the knife at his belt. He needed to finish his business and get Nijoni back to the high country before the moon rose. Eliza checked the small silver watch pinned to her lapel. It was now 4:30. The shadows were stretching out, reaching for her toes. Where was he? She looked toward the door of the trading post again. A large man in a dirty apron came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at her, then spat on the ground. He did not ask if she needed help. He did not offer to carry her trunk. He went back inside. The realization hit her slowly, cold and numbing like the wind. Mr. Harrison was not coming. Maybe the letter had been lost. Maybe the stagecoach was early. Or maybe She looked at the men on the porch again. They were still watching. The amusement had faded, replaced by a sort of grim expectancy. They knew something she did not. Eliza felt a sudden, terrifying urge to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Behind her was 3 days of empty desert. Ahead of her was a stranger's world. She had $18.40 in her purse. That was all. The wind picked up, snapping the fabric of the American flag that hung from a pole above the post office. The sound was sharp, like a whip cracking. Snap, snap, snap. It sounded like laughter. It sounded like fate mocking her stupidity. She had traveled 2,000 miles on a promise written on paper, and now she was standing in the dirt with nothing but a heavy trunk and a heart full of fear. She could not just stand here. To stand here was to admit defeat. To stand here was to let them see her tremble. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dust and pine smoke. She bent down and unbuckled the straps of her trunk. Her fingers were stiff with cold, clumsy on the brass buckles. "Need a hand, little lady," one of the men on the porch called out. His voice was slurred with drink. "I got strong hands." Laughter rippled across the porch. Eliza ignored him. She threw the lid back. The clothes were neatly folded, smelling of lavender sachets from a life that felt 100 years gone. She reached past the dresses, past the Bible, her hand diving to the bottom. She found the envelope. It was thick parchment, sealed with red wax. Her foster father, Dr. Samuel Thorne, had given it to her on his deathbed 3 weeks ago. He had been a hard man, a surveyor before he was a doctor, and he had spent years in these territories before returning east to die. "Eliza," he had rasped, his breath rattling in his chest. "You are going to a hard place. I have nothing to leave you but this. Do not open it unless you are alone, unless you are desperate." She was alone. She was desperate. She pulled the envelope out, clutching it to her chest. She looked up and saw the Indian man by the corral. He was still there. He was watching her, not with the leering eyes of the men on the porch, but with a gaze that felt like a physical weight. It was intense, assessing, dangerous. He looked like he knew what was in the trunk. He looked like he knew everything about loss and survival. For a second, their eyes locked across the dusty yard. Eliza felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the wind. He was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a thunderstorm on the horizon. His face was sharp angles and copper skin, his hair held back with a strip of leather. Then he turned away, taking the little girl's hand and leading her toward a wagon loaded with supplies. He was leaving her to the wolves. Eliza looked down at the envelope in her hands. Her thumb traced the red wax seal. With a sudden, jerky motion, she broke the seal and tore the paper open. There was a single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was shaky, written by a dying hand, but the words were clear. "My dear Eliza, if you are reading this, the world has likely failed you, as I feared it might. There is a map in the lining of this trunk, sewn behind the blue velvet. It marks the water sources I surveyed 10 years ago. It is worth more than gold in that country. But hear me well, if you have been tricked, if your husband is not who he said he was, or if he does not appear, trust no one with this trunk, especially under no circumstances. Are you to give this trunk or its contents to anyone carrying the name Crow?" Eliza read the name again. Crow. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, gasping, stuffing the letter quickly into her pocket. A man was standing there. He had come from the trading post, but he was not one of the rough men from the porch. He was dressed in a clean suit, though the cuffs were frayed. He wore a bowler hat and a smile that showed too many teeth. He was older, perhaps 45, with eyes that were flat and pale like old coins. "Good evening, Miss," the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely out of place in the howling wind. "You look like you are waiting for someone who has been delayed." Eliza stood up, her hand pressing against the pocket where the letter lay hidden. "I am waiting for Mr. Harrison." The man's smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. "Ah!" A tragedy. I am afraid Mr. Harrison will not be coming. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face.
What is he? Is he dead?
Let us say he has been detained indefinitely, the man said. He took a step closer. He smelled of bay rum and stale cigar smoke. He looked down at her trunk. His eyes lingered on it with a hunger that made Eliza's skin crawl. But do not worry, my dear, he said, reaching out a hand as if to touch her arm. My name is Silas Crow, and I am here to help you. Eliza froze. The wind roared in her ears, drowning out the world, leaving only the sound of her own heartbeat and the name echoing in her mind. Crow. She gripped the handle of the trunk until her knuckles turned white. She looked past him, towards the desert, where the Indian scout and the little girl were disappearing into the twilight. She was alone. The trap had snapped shut, and the only warning she had was burning a hole in her pocket. Mr. Crow, Eliza said, her voice trembling but her chin lifting, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. I believe I will handle my own baggage. The wind howled, and the first star of the evening appeared, cold and distant, looking down on the girl who had brought a secret to a land that killed for less. Silas Crow did not move like a man of the frontier. He moved like a banker walking across a marble floor. Despite the dust that coated his polished boots, he stood between Eliza and the open road, his smile fixed and terrible, a mask of civility plastered over something far more primal. Come now, Miss Hart, Crow said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to be soothing but sounded to Eliza like the rasp of a shovel against gravel. There is no need for theatrics. The desert at night is no place for a lady, and certainly not one encumbered by such a heavy load. Eliza felt the weight of the trunk pulling at her arm, a physical reminder of the secret she carried. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. The letter from Dr. Thorne burned in her pocket. Do not give this trunk to anyone carrying the name Crow. I was told Mr. Harrison would meet me, she said, her voice tighter than she wished. She did not move toward him. Mr. Harrison is a man of many complications, Crow said, waving a hand dismissively. He asked me to secure your comfort until he could arrive. I own the trading post here. I have a room prepared. It is modest, but it has a lock on the door and it is warm. Surely that is better than freezing to death in the street while waiting for a ghost. He was right, and that was the horror of it. The wind was cutting through her wool shawl as if it were gauze. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the sun having vanished behind the mesas, leaving the sky a bruised purple. She looked toward the porch of the general store. The men there were watching, their faces shadowed, their laughter gone. They were waiting to see if the spider had caught the fly. If she ran now, into the dark, she would die of exposure before morning. If she stayed, she was walking into the lion's den, but a den had walls, and walls offered a chance to think, to plan. Very well, Eliza said, forcing her shoulders down. I will take the room, for one night. I have funds to pay. Crow's eyes crinkled at the corners, but the flat, pale irises remained cold. Your money is not necessary, Miss Hart. Consider it a welcome gift to the territory. Here, let me assist you. He reached for the handle of the trunk. No, Eliza said sharply. She snatched the handle back, her fingers brushing against his glove. The leather felt cold and slick. I will carry it. It contains personal effects, delicates. Crow paused. For a second, the mask slipped, and Eliza saw a flash of irritation, sharp and dangerous. Then the smile returned. As you wish. Independent spirit. I admire that. It is a quality that dies hard out here. He turned and led the way toward the main building. Eliza followed, dragging the heavy leather trunk through the dirt. Every step was a battle. The wheels of the trunk caught on stones, the weight of it straining her shoulder, but she refused to let go. She felt the eyes of the men on the porch as she passed. They did not speak. They simply watched, their silence heavy with complicity. The room was at the top of a narrow, creaking staircase at the back of the store. It was small, smelling of sawdust, kerosene, and the lingering odor of unwashed men. There was a narrow iron bed with a thin quilt, a wash basin with a crack in the porcelain, and a single window that looked out over the back alley and the horse corrals. "Sleep well, Miss Hart," Crow said, standing in the doorway. He blocked the light from the hall, casting a long shadow across the floorboards. His eyes flicked to the trunk one last time, hungry and calculating. "We will discuss your future in the morning. I am sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding your situation." He closed the door. Eliza heard the heavy tumblers of a lock clicking, but the sound did not come from her side. He had locked her in from the hallway. Eliza stood frozen for a moment, listening to his footsteps recede down the stairs. Then, she exhaled a breath she felt she'd been holding for an hour. She rushed to the door and tried the handle. It was solid. She was a prisoner. She dragged the trunk to the foot of the bed and sat on it, her hands trembling. She took the envelope from her pocket and reread the warning. Trust no one. Below her, the sounds of the saloon began to rise. The piano started a tinny, discordant tune, laughter, the clink of glass, the heavy thud of boots. The floorboards were thin, separated by wide gaps where the wood had shrunk in the dry air. Eliza knelt on the floor, pressing her ear to the rough wood. She could hear voices directly beneath her. It sounded like an office or a storage room behind the bar. "She is skittish," a voice said. It was Crow. The smoothness was gone, replaced by a hard, business-like tone. "Holding onto that trunk like it is full of diamonds." "Maybe it is," another voice grunted. It was deeper, rougher. "Why not just take it, break the lock, toss her in the street? No one here will say a word. She is just another stray." "Because, you fool," Crow snapped. "Dr. Thorne was a meticulous man. If the girl has the survey papers, she might not know what they are. But if we break her neck, and the papers are not in the trunk, if she mailed them ahead, if she hid them, we need her to give them up. We need to know what she knows." Eliza covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. "The railroad needs that water," Crow continued, his voice dropping lower. "With the map of the aquifers, I control where the steam engines stop. I control where the town grows. I control everything from here to Santa Fe. That red wax envelope is the deed to a kingdom. I want it tonight. Go get the master key. Wait until she is asleep. Then go in. And the girl, if she wakes up," Crow said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Make it look like an accident, a tragic fall down the stairs. It happens all the time." Eliza scrambled back from the spot on the floor, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. They were coming. Not in the morning. Tonight. She looked at the window. It was her only way out. She rushed to it and pushed the sash up. It groaned in protest but slid open. A blast of freezing air hit her face. She looked down. It was a 12-foot drop to the dirt alley below. There was a stack of hay bales and refuse piled against the wall, which might break a fall. But the trunk... She looked at the leather trunk. It was too heavy to lower with a rope made of bed sheets, but she could not leave it. The map was inside. If Crow got the map, he won, and Dr. Thorne's legacy, the protection of the water, would be destroyed. She had to try. Eliza grabbed the quilt from the bed and stripped the sheets. Her nurse's training took over efficient, precise knots. She tied the sheet to the handle of the trunk and looped the other end around the iron bed frame. It was not long enough to reach the ground, but it would get it halfway. She pushed the trunk to the windowsill. It was heavy, agonizingly heavy. She gritted her teeth, sweat breaking out on her forehead despite the cold. With a heave, she tipped it over the edge. It dangled there, spinning slowly against the wooden siding of the building. Eliza climbed onto the sill. She was terrified. She was a schoolteacher, a woman of books and medicine. Not a thief in the night, but the fear of what waited for her in that room was greater than the fear of the fall. She grabbed the sheet, wrapped it around her hands, and lowered herself out. The rough fabric burned her palms. She slid down until her feet touched the top of the trunk, then, taking a breath, she let go and jumped. She hit the hay bales with a muffled thud, rolling onto the dirt. The impact jarred her teeth, but she was unhurt. The trunk swung above her. Then the sheet tore with a sharp ripping sound. The trunk fell the last 4 feet, landing in the dust with a heavy whump. Eliza scrambled up, checking the lock. It held. She grabbed the handle and began to drag it toward the shadows of the stables. The alley was dark, smelling of horse manure and wet straw. She needed to get to the open desert. She needed to run. But as she rounded the corner of the stable, she froze. The back of the trading post was not empty. A group of men were gathered around a fire in a metal drum, drinking from a bottle. They were the men from the porch. They looked up as she appeared, a woman in a torn dress dragging a trunk through the muck. "Well, look at this," one of them drawled. "Bird is trying to fly the coop." Eliza backed away.
"Please," she whispered. "He is going to kill me. Crow. He means to hurt me."
The men looked at each other. Then they laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound. "Mr. Crow owns the roof over our heads." "Missy," one of them said. "And he pays for the whiskey. You best go back inside before you get into real trouble." They were not going to help her. Society here was not built on chivalry. It was built on debt and fear. She was alone against the town. Eliza turned to run the other way, toward the dark expanse of the sagebrush. But her path was blocked by a stack of empty crates. She was trapped in the small yard behind the kitchen. Suddenly, a small figure detached itself from the shadows near the water trough. It was the little Indian girl, Nijoni. The child was shivering, her thin cotton dress offering no protection against the freezing night. She looked at Eliza with huge, dark eyes. There was no fear in her gaze, only a desperate, crushing hope. Nijoni stepped forward and grabbed the fabric of Eliza's skirt. Her hand was tiny, the skin rough and cold.
"Liza,"
the girl whispered. She struggled with the sounds of the language.
"Can you be my mommy?"
The question hung in the cold air, more shocking than a gunshot. Eliza stopped. The panic that had been driving her forward hit a wall of sudden, overwhelming emotion. She looked down at the child. The girl's face was dirty, her hair tangled, but her eyes were seeking something that Eliza understood perfectly. It was the same look Eliza had seen in the mirror for years, the look of someone who had no one.
"Oh, sweet child,"
Eliza whispered, dropping to her knees regardless of the filth. She reached out and touched the girl's cheek.
"Where is your family?"
"Gone," Nijoni said simply. "Uncle is sad, only sad." From the shadows near the corral fence, a man stepped out.
It was Kai Bege.
He moved silently, a ghost in the darkness. He had been watching. He had seen Eliza drop from the window. He had seen the men mock her, and now he saw his niece clinging to the white woman's skirts. His face was hard, his jaw set in a line of granite. He did not look at Eliza with sympathy. He looked at her with calculation. She was trouble. She was a beacon drawing attention to this dark corner where he and Nijoni were trying to stay invisible. He stepped closer, his boots making no sound on the earth. He reached out to pull Nijoni away. "Nijoni," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Come away. She is not for you." "But she is nice," Nijoni protested, holding onto Eliza's hand tighter. "She smells like flowers." "She smells like death," Kai said, his eyes locking with Eliza's.
"Crow is coming. Can you not hear them?"
Eliza listened. From inside the building, she heard a shout, then the sound of a door being kicked open upstairs. "She is gone," Crow's voice roared. "Check the back. Get the dogs." Kai's expression shifted. The cold detachment cracked, revealing a flash of urgency. He looked at Nijoni, then at Eliza, then at the trunk. He knew what Crow was capable of. If Crow found them here together, he would not just kill the woman. He would kill the Indian scout who saw it happen, and he would do worse to the child. Kai cursed softly in his own tongue. He had a choice. He could fade into the dark right now, take Najoni and vanish into the canyons where no white man could track him. It was the safe choice. It was the smart choice. But then he looked at Eliza. She was on her knees in the dirt, terrified. Yet she was not pulling her hand away from Najoni. She was shielding the child with her body, placing herself between the girl and the direction of the shouting men. It was a small gesture, but it pierced through Kai's armor. The back door of the trading post burst open. Light spilled out into the yard. "There!" a man shouted. "By the stables!" Silas Crow stepped into the light, a shotgun in his hand. He saw them. "Kill the buck!" Crow yelled, raising the weapon. "Bring the girl in the trunk to me." Time seemed to slow down. Kai saw the barrel of the shotgun rising. He moved. He did not run away. He lunged forward, grabbing Eliza by the arm and hauling her to her feet with a strength that made her gasp. He scooped Najoni up with his other arm, swinging her onto his hip. "Run!" Kai ordered, his voice a command that brokered no argument. He shoved Eliza toward the gap between the stables and the blacksmith's forge. A gunshot cracked the air, and wood splintered from a post inches from Eliza's head. She screamed, a short, sharp sound, but she did not freeze. "My trunk!" Eliza cried, looking back. Kai did not stop. He grabbed the leather handle of the trunk with his free hand, his muscles straining as he heaved the heavy weight. He was incredibly strong, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. "Move," he snarled. They scrambled into the darkness behind the forge. The heavy scent of coal smoke filled Eliza's lungs. They were running blindly now, away from the light, away from the town. "This way," Kai hissed. He did not lead them toward the road. The road was death. Horses would run them down in minutes. He led them toward the dry wash, the jagged scar in the earth that led out into the open desert. Behind them, the shouts were getting louder. Dogs were barking now, the baying sound of hounds catching a scent. Eliza stumbled over a root. Falling to her knees, she gasped, the cold air burning her throat. I cannot." Kai stopped. He dropped the trunk and set Najoni down. The little girl was silent, her eyes wide, trained to be quiet in danger. Kai grabbed Eliza by the shoulders. His grip was hard, bruising. He brought his face close to hers. In the starlight, his eyes were black pools of intensity. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough. "They will not stop. Crow will hunt you until he has that paper. And now he has seen you with me. He will hang me and sell the child. We are dead men walking if we stay here." "Where can we go?" Eliza sobbed, looking at the endless, frozen blackness of the desert. "There is nothing out there. There is life out there if you know where to look," Kai said, "and there is death if you stay." He looked back at the lights of the trading post, bobbing lanterns moving toward them. "I know a path," Kai said, "the old one's path, through the Badlands. Horses cannot follow, but it is hard. It is cold, and if you fall behind, I will leave you." He lied. Eliza saw it in his eyes. He would not leave her, not now. He had already stepped into the fire for her. "Follow me if you want to live," he said. Eliza looked at the trunk, then at Najoni, who was holding Kai's leg but reaching a hand out toward Eliza. She looked at Kai. He was a stranger, a warrior from a world she did not understand. But in the chaos, he was the only thing that felt solid. She reached down, grabbed the handle of her trunk with both hands, and nodded. "I am coming," she whispered. Kai nodded once, sharp and quick. He hoisted Najoni onto his back, grabbed the other handle of the trunk to help her carry the weight between them, and turned toward the dark, jagged silhouette of the mountains. Together, they stepped off the edge of the civilized world and into the wild, unforgiving night. The darkness of the Badlands was not merely an absence of light. It was a physical weight that pressed against the lungs. The wind had turned from a gale into a steady, freezing knife that sliced through layers of wool and cotton alike. There was no moon, only the cold, indifferent stare of 1,000 stars looking down on the 3 small figures navigating the labyrinth of sandstone and scrub brush. Eliza stumbled, her boot catching on a hidden root. She went down to one knee, the handle of the heavy leather trunk wrenching her shoulder socket.
Up!
Kai's voice came from the darkness ahead. It was not cruel, but it was devoid of pity. If you stop, the cold takes you. He was carrying the front end of the trunk, moving backward with a sure-footedness that seemed impossible in the pitch black. On his back, Najoni slept fitfully, strapped into a makeshift carrier he had fashioned from his own sash. Eliza gritted her teeth and forced herself to stand. Her lungs burned with every inhalation of the icy air.
I am moving,
she rasped.
I am just not a mountain goat.
We are not in the mountains yet, Kai said. This is just the foothills. The sand is soft here. It gets harder. He turned and pulled, and she had no choice but to follow. They were tethered together by the trunk, by the secret inside it, and by the fear of the men hunting them. The sand whipped against Eliza's face, stinging her eyes and coating her tongue with the taste of ancient dust. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but the image of Silas Crow's flat, dead eyes drove her forward. They walked for what felt like hours, though Eliza had lost all sense of time. The landscape was a nightmare of twisted rock formations that looked like crouching beasts in the shadows. Finally, Kai steered them toward a narrow fissure in a canyon wall. It opened into a shallow overhang, protected from the biting wind by a screen of mesquite bushes. Here, Kai said. He set his end of the trunk down carefully. Eliza dropped her handle and collapsed against the cold stone wall, her chest heaving. She felt lightheaded, her vision swimming with exhaustion. Kai did not rest. He unstrapped Najoni and laid her on a relatively flat patch of sand. He moved efficiently, gathering dead wood from the brush, checking the perimeter, listening to the wind for the sound of horses.
Fire,
Eliza asked, her voice trembling.
Will they not see it?
We are deep in the cut, Kai said. The rock hides the light. If we do not have fire, the child freezes. He struck a match against his boot heel. The small flare of sulfur illuminated his face sharp angles, dark eyes that scanned the darkness, and a mouth set in a grim line. Within minutes, a small, smokeless fire was crackling, fed by dry sage and twisted roots. The light revealed the toll of the escape. Eliza's dress was torn at the hem, her boots scuffed white, but it was Najoni who drew Eliza's attention. The little girl was awake now, sitting up and clutching her arm. There was a dark smear of blood on her sleeve.
She is hurt,
Eliza said, the exhaustion vanishing instantly as her training took over. She scrambled over to the trunk and fumbled with the latches. Kai moved to intercept her, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt.
What are you doing? My medical kit?
Eliza snapped, not looking at him.
Get me water, if you have any.
Kai hesitated. He watched her hands. They were shaking from the cold, but as she opened the trunk and lifted out a wooden box, the shaking stopped. Her movements became precise. She laid out a clean cloth, a small bottle of carbolic acid, and a roll of linen bandages. He unhooked his canteen and handed it to her. Eliza turned to Najoni.
Let me see. Sweet one.
Najoni whimpered, pulling her arm back. The sleeve was stuck to a jagged cut on her forearm, likely from a sharp branch during their flight. It is okay, Eliza cooed, her voice dropping an octave, becoming warm and liquid. I am going to fix it. You are brave. Aren't you braver than any soldier I know? Kai watched from the other side of the fire. He had expected the white woman to be useless. He had seen the way she stumbled in the sand. He had expected hysterics. But as she worked, peeling the fabric away, cleaning the wound with a stinging antiseptic that made Najoni hiss but not cry, he saw something else. She had hands that knew pain. She did not flinch at the blood. She cleaned the grit from the cut, applied a salve that smelled of herbs, and wrapped the arm with a tightness that was secure but gentle. "There," Eliza said, tying off the bandage. "Good as new." Najoni looked at the white bandage, then up at Eliza. "It burns."
That means it is killing the bad spirits in the cut,"
Eliza said, smiling tiredly. Kai sat back on his heels. The distrust in his chest, usually a solid wall, developed a hairline fracture. "You have done this before."
"I was a nurse in Philadelphia,"
Eliza said, packing her supplies away. "And a teacher. I have seen more scraped knees and fevered brows than I can count." She looked at him across the fire. The hostility was still there in his posture, but the immediate threat of violence had receded.
"Why are they hunting you?"
Kai asked. He needed to know the weight of the burden he was carrying. "Crow does not run dogs in the night for a mail-order bride." Eliza hesitated. She touched the pocket where the letter rested. The warning trust no one echoed in her mind. But she looked at the man who had carried her trunk through the sand. Who had shielded the child? If he wanted to rob her, he could have done it miles ago and left her for the coyotes. "My foster father," Eliza said slowly. "His name was Dr. Samuel Thorne. He was a surveyor for the government 10 years ago. He mapped this entire territory." Kai's eyes narrowed. "Thorne. I remember that name. He walked the dry lands. He did not carry a gun. He mapped the aquifers," Eliza continued. "The underground water, before he died, he told me that there were men who wanted those maps buried. He sent me here to give his journals to a federal investigator in Santa Fe, a man named Mr. Sterling." She reached into the trunk and pulled out the heavy, wax-sealed envelope, holding it up but not offering it. "Crow is not just a trader," she said. "He is brokering land deals for the railroad, but he is selling land that he claims is dry and worthless to the government, and then buying it back cheap through shell companies because he knows exactly where the water is." Kai looked at the fire, his expression darkening. "That explains the fences. Last month, Crow's men put up fences around the Bitter Springs. They said it was private land. My people have watered sheep there for 5 generations. Now, if we go there, we are shot for trespassing." He looked up at Eliza, and the intensity in his gaze made her catch her breath. "It is not just money," Kai said. "It is genocide by thirst. If he controls the water, he controls who lives and who dies. He is pushing the dying into the rocks where there is nothing but dust." "Then this," Eliza tapped the envelope, "is the proof. It has the original surveys. It proves the water belongs to the public trust, not to Silas Crow." "And that," Kai said, standing up and kicking dirt over the fire to douse it, "is why he will burn the whole territory to stop us. Santa Fe is 200 miles away." "We have to try," Eliza said. "Hush!" Kai commanded instantly. He turned his head, listening to the dark. The wind whistled through the canyon, but underneath it, there was another sound, the clatter of a stone falling, the creak of leather. "They found us," Kai whispered. He grabbed Najoni and shoved her into the deepest crevice at the back of the overhang. "Stay! Do not make a sound!" He turned to Eliza. "Get down, behind the trunk." "Who is it?" Eliza whispered, her heart hammering. "Bounty hunters," Kai said. He did not draw a gun. He pulled a long, curved knife from his belt and picked up a heavy piece of driftwood. "Crow sent the professionals." 2 shadows detached themselves from the canyon walls. They were big men, wearing long dusters, moving with the heavy confidence of predators. One held a rifle. The other had a revolver drawn. "Come out, boy," a voice rasped, echoing off the stone. "We know you are in there. Give us the girl and the box, and maybe we leave you with your scalp." Kai did not answer. He motioned for Eliza to stay low. He picked up a stone and threw it hard against the canyon wall 10 feet to their left. The clatter drew the rifleman's gaze for a split second. That was all Kai needed. He launched himself from the darkness not like a man, but like a cougar springing from a ledge. He slammed into the man with the pistol, driving his shoulder into the man's gut. The gun went off, the shot going wild and striking the stone ceiling with a deafening crack. Eliza screamed, covering her ears. The second man, the one with the rifle, swung his weapon toward Kai. Kai was grappling with the first man, using the bounty hunter's body as a shield. Eliza saw the rifle barrel leveling. She could not just watch. She looked around frantically. Her hand closed around the heavy glass bottle of carbolic acid from her open kit. She stood up. "Hey!" she screamed. The rifleman flinched, turning his head toward the woman. Eliza threw the bottle with all the strength she possessed. It was a clumsy throw, but it struck the man in the shoulder, shattering. The strong acid splashed onto his neck and jaw. The man howled, dropping the rifle to claw at his burning skin. Kai finished the first man with a brutal strike of his elbow to the temple, knocking him unconscious. He spun around, scooped up the fallen rifle, and leveled it at the second man who was still screaming and wiping at his face. "Go," Kai said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "Run back to your master. Tell him the desert is closed." The bounty hunter, blinded in one eye and terrified by the sudden turn, scrambled backward, falling over himself to get away into the dark. Kai stood panting, the rifle held steady until the sounds of the man's retreat faded entirely. He checked the unconscious man on the ground, removing the man's weapons and tossing them into the brush. He did not kill him. Eliza stood trembling, her hands pressed to her mouth. She had hurt a man. She had caused pain. Kai turned to her. He looked at the shattered glass, then at her. "You threw acid." I did not have a rock," Eliza stammered. "Effective," Kai said. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had given her. He went to the back of the cave and pulled Najoni out. The little girl ran straight to Eliza, burying her face in Eliza's skirts. "Eliza," Najoni sobbed. "Liza, scared." Eliza froze. The name was short, intimate, stripped of formality. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around the child. I know, I am here." Kai watched them. The sight of the white woman comforting the dying child disturbed something deep inside him. It broke the rules of the world he knew, but he could not deny that without her, he might be dead right now. "We have to move," Kai said. "The one who ran will bring others. We need to reach the high pass before dawn." They packed quickly. The trunk seemed heavier now, burdened by the violence of the night. As they walked, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a bone-deep cold. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. Eliza's teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. She was wearing only her dress and the thin shawl. Her coat had been lost in the initial scramble from the trading post. Where are we going?" Eliza stuttered. "We need the army, Fort Wingate. It is east." "No," Kai said, walking ahead. "They will help," Eliza insisted, hurrying to catch up. "They are the law." Kai stopped and spun around. "The law, the soldiers at Wingate eat beef supplied by Silas Crow. Their commander drinks whiskey paid for by Crow's land deals. If we walk into that fort, they will hand the papers to Crow and put me in a cell. Or a grave." "Not everyone is corrupt," Eliza argued, though her conviction was shivering along with her body. "There has to be order." "Order is just what men with money call their rules," Kai said bitterly. "Out here, there is only survival." He looked at her. She was turning blue. Her lips were pale, her shaking violent. She would not last another hour. Kai sighed, a sound of frustration and resignation. He stopped and unrolled the bundle tied to the top of the trunk. It was a blanket, heavy wool, woven with intricate patterns of red, black, and gray. He walked over to her and draped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, smelling of wood smoke, lanolin, and sage. The warmth was immediate. "This," Kai said, his hand lingering for a second on the wool near her shoulder, "was my mother's
She wove it the winter before the soldiers came. Eliza touched the rough fabric. She knew enough to know that for a Navajo warrior, giving away such an item was significant. It was not a gesture of romance. It was a transfer of protection. "I cannot take this," she said. "You will be cold." "I am used to the cold," Kai said, turning away. "Keep it wrapped tight. It is a promise that you will live to see the sun. Do not make me a liar." They walked on in silence. The blanket felt like a shield. It was the first time Eliza felt truly safe since stepping off the stagecoach. The sky began to lighten in the east, the stars fading into a pale gray. The jagged silhouette of the horizon revealed itself. "We are close to the ridge," Kai said. "From there, we can see the old wagon road that leads toward Santa Fe. If we can flag down a supply train, maybe we have a chance." They crested the ridge as the first rays of the sun hit the desert floor. The view was expansive, stretching for 50 miles. Kai stopped dead. "What is it?" Eliza asked, stepping up beside him, clutching the blanket. "Look," Kai pointed. In the distance, where the winding line of the wagon road should have been a ribbon of safety, there was a column of black smoke rising into the still air. It was thick and oily. "That is the bridge at Coyote Creek," Kai said, his voice flat. "It is burning." "Burning," Eliza whispered. "Crow," Kai said. "He knows we have to go south or east. He has cut the road. He burned the bridge to stop us." Eliza looked at the smoke, then at the vast, empty wilderness that stretched out before them. The road to Santa Fe was gone. The army was corrupt. The town was a trap. "What do we do?" she asked, the fear returning. Kai looked at her, then at Nijoni, and finally at the smoke that marked the destruction of their escape route. "We stop running," Kai said. "If he wants to burn the world to trap us, then we have to go where the fire cannot reach." "Where is that?" "Deeper," Kai said, turning his back on the rising sun and facing the jagged, red-toothed mountains to the north. "Into the Canyon of the Dead, my people's stronghold. If we cannot go to the law, we bring the law to us." Eliza looked at the forbidding peaks. It looked like a fortress of stone, impenetrable and deadly. "Is it safe?" she asked. Kai adjusted the strap of the trunk on his shoulder. "No, but it is the only place left." He started walking, and Eliza, wrapped in the blanket of a woman she would never meet, followed him away from the light of civilization and into the heart of the wild. The Canyon of the Dead lived up to its name. It was a jagged scar in the earth, a labyrinth of red stone and deep shadows where the sun only touched the bottom for an hour at noon. The wind here did not howl. It moaned, funneling through the narrow crevices with a sound like a grieving woman. Kai led them along a deer trail that clung to the side of the canyon wall. Below them, 100 feet down, a river of glacial meltwater churned, gray and angry, swollen by the early thaw in the high peaks. They had been walking for 2 days since the burning of the bridge. The pace was punishing. Eliza's boots, made for the cobblestones of Philadelphia, were shredded at the toes. Her feet bled, but she did not complain. She had learned quickly that complaint wasted breath, and breath was precious at this altitude. They stopped to rest in a shallow alcove protected from the biting wind. Kai handed Eliza a strip of dried meat. It was tough as leather, but she chewed it gratefully. "We are moving too slow," Kai said. He was looking back the way they had come, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. "Crow has telegraphs. He has sent word ahead to the mining camps in the north. By now, every man with a rifle thinks I am a kidnapper and you are a thief." Eliza swallowed the dry meat. "A thief?" "The story is easy to sell," Kai said, turning to look at her. His face was drawn, the fatigue showing in the dark circles under his eyes. "A savage stole a white woman and her trunk of valuables. The woman is a victim, or she is a harlot who conspired with him. Either way, the townspeople will shoot first." Eliza pulled the blanket tighter around herself. It was the blanket his mother had woven, and it smelled of him smoke and pine. I never thought being a nurse and a teacher would end with me being hunted." She looked at Najoni, who was sleeping, curled up against a warm rock. "I was an orphan. Kai, did you know that?" Kai shook his head slightly. He sat down, cleaning his rifle with a rag. "I was left on the steps of the asylum when I was 2, Eliza said, her voice quiet. "I spent my whole life trying to be useful. In the orphanage. If you were useful, they kept you. If you were trouble, they sent you to the workhouse. I scrubbed floors until my hands bled. I learned to read by stealing candle stubs. I became a nurse because people need nurses. I thought if I was needed, I would be safe." She looked down at her hands, scarred now by the desert. "That letter, the marriage proposal, it was the first time someone asked for me. Not for a servant, not for a nurse, for a wife. I was so terrified of being left behind again, of being the leftover thing that no one wanted, that I crossed a continent for a man I never met." Kai stopped cleaning the rifle. He looked at her, and the hardness in his face softened. "Just a fraction. I know what it is to be defined by what you do, not who you are." Kai said, "For years, I was just a scout, a tracker. I thought if I followed the orders of the army, if I kept my head down and did my job, I could protect my family. I thought silence was a shield." He looked at Najoni, her mother, my sister. She believed in the law too. She went to the agent to complain about the cattlemen cutting our fences. She took the papers. She spoke English. She thought words would stop them. Kai's hand tightened on the rifle stock until his knuckles turned white. They did not listen to her words. They saw only an obstacle. I found her 3 days later in the dry wash. After that, I stopped believing in silence. A heavy silence settled between them, a shared understanding of loss. They were two people discarded by the world, trying to carry a child and a truth through a land that wanted them dead. "We have to cross the river," Kai said suddenly, standing up. "The trail ends here. The only way to the pass is on the other side." Eliza looked down at the churning gray water. It looked deadly. "Is there a ford?" "There are stepping stones," Kai said. "But the water is high. We have to be careful." They descended the canyon wall, the path treacherous and slick with frost. At the bottom, the roar of the water was deafening. The river was not wide, perhaps 30 feet, but it was violent. Large, flat stones broke the surface, slick with black moss and ice. "I will take Najoni first," Kai shouted over the roar. "Stay here. Do not move until I come back for the trunk." He hoisted Najoni high onto his shoulders. The little girl clung to his hair, terrified. Kai stepped onto the first stone. The water rushed over his boots, freezing and fast. He moved with the grace of a dancer, balancing on the slick rocks. He made it to the far bank and set Najoni down on a dry ledge. "Stay," he commanded the child. He turned back. Eliza was standing by the trunk. She looked at the water, then at Kai. She saw the exhaustion in his body. He had carried the child, the trunk, and the weight of their survival for 3 days without sleep. "I can bring the trunk," Eliza shouted. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to prove she was not a burden. "No!" Kai yelled, stepping back into the water. "Wait for me!" But Eliza had already grabbed the handle. She stepped onto the first stone. It was slippery, but she held her balance. She took another step. The trunk was heavy, swinging awkwardly. "Eliza, stop!" Kai roared, wading toward her. She was halfway across when it happened. A surge of water, a pulse from a melting drift miles upstream, hit the rocks. The stone under Eliza's right foot shifted. She screamed as she pitched forward. The trunk hit the water with a splash, dragging her down. The cold was instantaneous and paralyzing. It was not like cold air. It was a physical blow that drove the breath from her body. The current grabbed her skirts, heavy wool becoming lead weights, pulling her into the gray churn. Eliza. She heard her name, distorted by the water rushing over her head. She tumbled, striking her knee against a boulder.
The darkness swallowed her. She flailed, her hands numb, unable to find purchase. Then, a hand grabbed her arm. It was a grip of iron. Kai had plunged into the river. The water was up to his chest, threatening to sweep him away too. He braced his legs against the rocks, fighting the immense power of the current. He hauled her up, gasping and coughing, her hair plastered across her face. "I have you," he shouted. "Let go of the trunk." She was still clutching the handle, her frozen fingers locked in a death grip. The trunk was wedged between two rocks, the current pounding against it. "The papers," she choked out. "Let it go or you die," Kai snarled. He did not wait for her to decide. He pried her fingers loose, breaking her grip. He pulled her against his chest, shielding her from the current with his own body, and fought his way backward to the bank where Najoni was screaming. He dragged Eliza onto the sand. She was shaking so violently her teeth clicked together like castanets. Her skin was blue-white, her lips purple. The water in the river was barely above freezing. Hypothermia would set in within minutes. "The trunk," Eliza wept, trying to crawl back to the water. "It is stuck." Kai looked at the river. The trunk was indeed wedged tight between two boulders. It was not going anywhere for the moment. But Eliza was dying. "Forget the trunk," Kai said. He scooped her up in his arms. Her wet clothes were soaking him, freezing instantly in the wind that funneled through the canyon. "Cave," he grunted. "Up there." He carried her up a scree slope to a small, dry cave they had passed earlier. It was out of the wind, but it was freezing cold. He laid her down on the sandy floor. "Eliza," Kai said, his voice urgent. He slapped her cheek lightly. "Look at me." Her eyes were rolling back. "So cold," she whispered. "So tired." "No sleeping," Kai ordered. He knew what he had to do. It was the only way to save her. He had seen men die of the cold in minutes when wet. The wool dress, the petticoats, the corset, they were a tomb of ice wrapped around her body. "You have to get these clothes off," Kai said. "Eliza, do you hear me? They are killing you." She fumbled at the buttons of her bodice with clumsy, frozen fingers. She could not do it. She whimpered in frustration. Kai set his jaw. "Forgive me," he muttered. He reached out and began to undo the buttons. He worked with speed and efficiency. His face turned slightly away, his eyes focused on the task. Not the woman. He stripped the sodden wool dress from her shoulders. Pulling it down, he untied the strings of her petticoats. Eliza shivered uncontrollably, her body convulsing. She was terrified, humiliated and freezing, but she felt the heavy, wet weight leaving her. When she was stripped down to her thin chemise, which was also soaked, Kai hesitated for only a second. He pulled it over her head. She was naked, a pale, shivering virgin in the heart of a savage canyon, vulnerable in a way she had never been in her life. She curled into a ball, trying to hide herself, her shame burning hotter than the cold. Kai did not look. He stripped off his own heavy duster coat, which was dry on the inside. He wrapped it around her, engulfing her small frame in the leather and canvas. Then he grabbed the woolen blanket from his pack, the dry one, and wrapped that around her too. He pulled her into a sitting position and sat behind her, pulling her back against his chest. He wrapped his arms around the bundle of blankets, pressing his body heat into her. "Breathe," he commanded softly against her ear. "Steal my warmth. Take it." Eliza shook against him. She could feel the hard wall of his chest, the beat of his heart. He was warm. He was alive. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind outside and her own ragged breathing. Slowly, the violent shivering began to subside. The feeling returned to her fingers and toes, a painful prickling. She realized suddenly how intimate this was. She was naked beneath the coat. He was holding her, and yet she felt safer than she had ever felt in the polite parlors of Philadelphia. His hands were clasped over her stomach, outside the blanket. He did not roam. He did not take advantage of her helplessness. He was a guardian statue carved of warm flesh.
"I am sorry,"
she whispered, her voice raspy.
"I fell."
"You are alive," Kai said. His chin rested lightly on the top of her wet head.
You saw me,"
she stammered, the heat rising in her cheeks. Kai was silent for a moment.
"I saw a woman fighting to live,"
he said. "There is no shame in survival. Eliza—" She turned her head slightly, trying to look at him. Their faces were inches apart. She saw the dark depths of his eyes, usually so guarded, now open and vulnerable with fear that he had almost lost her.
"Why?"
she asked.
"Why did you jump in? You could have drowned."
"Because," Kai said, his voice low and rough, "I could not watch the water take you. I have lost too much to the land. I will not lose you." The admission hung in the air. Eliza realized then that he was not just her guide. He was the man who had chosen her, when no one else had. When the husband had failed to appear, this warrior had jumped into freezing water for her. She shifted slightly, turning in his arms. The movement was small, but it brought her lips close to his. She felt a sudden, fierce desire, not just for warmth, but for connection. She wanted to kiss him. She wanted to bridge the gap between their worlds. She leaned forward. Kai pulled back, just an inch. His hand came up, cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a droplet of river water. "No," he whispered. "Not like this. Not when you are frightened and cold and have no choice."
"I have a choice,"
Eliza said. "You are naked in my arms because you had to be to survive." Kai said firmly, "I will not take that as an invitation. My honor is not for sale." Eliza Hart. He looked deep into her eyes, and the promise he made next was sworn like a blood oath. "But know this," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur that vibrated in her chest. "When we are safe, when the sun is high and you are standing on your own feet, unafraid, every kiss will be yours, every single one, but you must ask for them." Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Tears pricked her eyes. It was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. It was a promise of respect. It was a promise of a future.
"Every kiss,"
she repeated softly. "Every one," Kai vowed. He held her until the storm in her blood quieted. When she was warm enough, he helped her dress in the spare oversized shirt from his saddlebag while her clothes dried by a small fire he built near the cave mouth. Later that afternoon, the water level dropped. Kai waded out and retrieved the trunk. It was battered, soaked, and heavy. They sat by the fire, exhausted. Eliza opened the trunk. The water had seeped in, ruining her books, dissolving the ink on her teaching certificates. She stared at the soggy mess, her past life washing away.
"But the wax envelope."
She pulled it out. The wax seal held. The paper inside was dry.
"Open it,"
Kai said. "We need to know what we almost died for." Eliza broke the seal. She pulled out the map, but behind the map was another paper, a letter, written in a different hand. She read it, and her blood ran cold.
"It is not just a survey,"
she said, looking up at Kai.
"It is a ledger. My father, he kept a record."
She pointed to a name on the list. "Captain James Sterling, Fort Wingate." "Sterling," Kai spat the name. "He is the commander of the garrison. He is the one who signed the order to relocate my people."
"Look at the number next to his name,"
Eliza said. $5,000, paid by Silas Crow. And here, a note. "For the suppression of the Navajo water rights and the accidental death of any agitators." Kai took the paper. His hands shook with rage. "He paid the army to kill us. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a transaction." "This proves treason," Eliza said. "Bribery of a federal officer. Conspiracy to commit murder. If we get this to the U.S. Marshal in Santa Fe, Sterling hangs, and Crow with him." "We have the weapon," Kai said, folding the paper carefully. "Now we just have to deliver the strike." They packed up, a new determination driving them. They were no longer running, They were on a mission. They descended the pass as evening fell, heading toward a small trading junction called Two Wells, where Kai hoped to steal horses. But they had underestimated Crow. They reached the outskirts of Two Wells at twilight. Kai signaled for them to stop in a grove of cottonwood trees. "I will go in." Kai said, "I will find horses. You stay here with Najoni. Keep the rifle. If anyone but me comes close, shoot." He slipped away into the shadows. Eliza waited. She held Najoni close. The little girl was quiet, playing with a small doll Eliza had made from dry grass. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Suddenly, a whistle cut through the air. It was a bird call, a meadowlark. It was the signal Kai had taught her. "Safe. Come." Eliza stood up. She grabbed the trunk handle with one hand and Najoni's hand with the other. They walked toward the sound, moving out of the trees and toward the edge of the corral. "Kai," she whispered. A shadow stepped out from behind the water tank. It was not Kai. It was a man in a duster coat, holding a heavy piece of wood. Before Eliza could raise the rifle, he swung. The wood struck her wrist, sending the gun flying into the dirt. Eliza screamed, but a hand clamped over her mouth. "Got them!" the man shouted. Another man appeared, grabbing Najoni. The child shrieked, kicking and biting. "No!" Eliza screamed against the hand. She bit down hard, tasting blood. The man swore and pulled his hand back. "Najoni, run!" Eliza yelled. But the second man had the child. He lifted her high, throwing her over his shoulder like a sack of flour. "Leave the woman!" a voice called out from the darkness. It was Silas Crow. He stepped into the moonlight, smoking a cigar. "We do not need her. We need the leverage." "Kai!" Eliza screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. "Kai!" From the other side of the junction, a gunshot rang out. Then another. Kai had been ambushed, pinned down by rifle fire near the stables. The bird call had been a mimicry, a trap. Crow looked at Eliza, who was being held by the first man. "Tell your savage friend," Crow said, smiling his dead smile, "that if he wants the girl back, he brings the red envelope to the old mission church at sunrise, alone." "You monster!" Eliza spat. "Just a businessman, my dear." Crow said, "Take the girl." They dragged Najoni away. The child's screams, "Liza, uncle," faded into the rumble of a wagon pulling away. The man holding Eliza shoved her hard into the dirt and ran to join the wagon. Silence returned to the junction, broken only by the heavy breathing of a man running toward her. Kai burst into the clearing. He was bleeding from a graze on his cheek, his chest heaving. He looked at the empty space where Najoni had been. He looked at Eliza, lying in the dust. "Where is she?" Kai's voice was a low growl, terrifying in its intensity. "They took her," Eliza sobbed, pushing herself up. "It was a trap. The whistle. I thought it was you. I brought her out. I gave her to them." Kai stared at the dust. The rage radiating off him was palpable. It was hot enough to burn the air. He gripped his rifle until the wood creaked. For a second, Eliza thought he might strike her. He had trusted her with the one thing he loved, and she had failed. But then he looked at her face. He saw the guilt that was crushing her. He saw the bruises on her wrist where she had fought. He dropped to his knees in front of her. He did not hug her. He grabbed her shoulders. "Did they say where?" Kai demanded. "The old mission church," Eliza gasped. "Sunrise, the envelope for the girl." Kai looked toward the east. His eyes were no longer human. They were the eyes of a wolf that had cornered its prey. "They think I will trade," Kai said, his voice deadly calm. "They think I will give them the paper and take the girl and run." "We have to give it to them," Eliza said. "We have to save her." "No," Kai said. He stood up, pulling Eliza with him. "If I give them the paper, they kill us all. Sterling cannot let witnesses live. The exchange is an execution." "Then what do we do?" Eliza cried. "We cannot leave her." "We are not leaving her,"
Kai said, "and we are not trading." He walked over to the trunk and pulled out the envelope. He looked at it, then shoved it into his shirt. "We are done running. Eliza." Kai said, "Crow wants a meeting. We will give him one, but we are not going to the church to negotiate." "What are we going to do?" Kai checked the load in his rifle. The click of the chamber was loud and final. "We are going to war," Kai promised. "We are going to bring the roof down on their heads." The rising sun bled over the rim of the Red Rock Canyon, painting the sandstone walls in violent shades of crimson and bruised purple. It was a place of ghosts and echoes, where the wind whistled through natural arches with a sound like dying breath. The old mission church, little more than a skeletal frame of adobe and timber, stood near the edge of a dry riverbed, its bell tower long since fallen. Eliza Hart stood alone in the center of the clearing before the ruins. The wind whipped her skirts around her legs and tore at the loose strands of hair escaping her braid. She looked small against the vast, indifferent landscape, but she stood with a rigidity that belied her terror. At her feet sat the leather trunk, its brass fittings gleaming dully in the morning light. It was not the real trunk. The real trunk was hidden under a tarp in a cave a mile back. This one was filled with rocks and old blankets, a heavy decoy for a deadly game. 50 yards away, concealed in the jagged rocks above the canyon floor, Kai Bege lay flat on his stomach, the cold stone pressed against his chest, grounding him. He sighted down the barrel of his Winchester rifle, his breathing slow and shallow. He was not alone. To his left, hidden behind a cluster of sagebrush, was Tobias, the black blacksmith from the junction who had served in the cavalry and owed Kai a life debt. To his right, nestled in a sniper's roost, was Maria, the sharp-eyed midwife who knew the canyons better than any coyote. They were the invisible army Kai had summoned in the dark hours of the night, the people of the fringe, the one society ignored until they needed something fixed or birthed. "Steady," Kai whispered to himself, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was not a hunt. This was a rescue, and the margin for error was narrower than a knife blade. The sound of wheels crunching on gravel broke the silence. A buckboard wagon rolled into view from the northern trail, flanked by 3 riders. Silas Crow sat on the bench seat, reins in one hand, a cigar clamped between his teeth. Beside him, small and terrified, sat Najoni. Kai's finger tightened on the trigger. He saw the rope binding his niece's wrists. He saw the bruise on her cheek. The rage flared hot and white, threatening to consume his focus, but he forced it down. Violence was easy. Saving the girl was hard. Crow pulled the wagon to a halt 20 paces from Eliza. The riders fanned out, their hands hovering near their holsters. They looked nervous. The canyon was too quiet, the shadows too deep. "You came," Crow called out. His voice was jovial, the tone of a man greeting a neighbor, which made the scene all the more grotesque. "And you brought my property." "I brought the trunk," Eliza said. Her voice did not tremble. She projected it clearly, just as she had in the schoolhouse, ensuring it carried to the hidden ears in the rocks. "The map, the surveys, the proof." "Excellent," Crow said. Climbing down, he dragged Najoni with him, gripping her shoulder with unnecessary force. The little girl saw Eliza and let out a choked sob, but she did not scream. She was dying. She endured. "Let the girl go," Eliza said, taking a step forward. "Then you get the trunk." Crow laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "My dear Miss Hart, you are hardly in a position to negotiate. You are one woman in the middle of nowhere. I could shoot you where you stand and take the trunk anyway." "You could," Eliza said, her hand slipping into the pocket of her dress, clutching the wax-sealed envelope, the real one. "But then you would never find the rest of it. Dr. Thorne did not just leave a map. Mr. Crow, he left a diary, a detailed log of every bribe, every meeting, every illegal fence." Crow's smile faltered. "A diary?" I hid it, Eliza lied, her chin lifting. If I die, it goes to the United States Marshal in Santa Fe. If I walk away with the child, you get the map and I burn the diary. She was improvising, drawing him out, baiting the hook. Crow's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, dragging Najoni. You are bluffing. Thorne was a drunk. Thorne was a scientist, Eliza retorted. He wrote down the dates. August 12th, $5,000 paid to Captain Sterling at Fort Wingate. Crow stiffened. The riders behind him shifted uneasily. Mentioning Sterling's name was dangerous. You seem to know a great deal for a schoolteacher, Crow hissed, his facade cracking. I know you are stealing the water, Eliza pressed, her voice rising. I know you paid Sterling to relocate the Navajo family so you could claim the aquifers for the railroad. I know you plan to sell the government their own land back at 10 times the price.
It is business, Crow roared, losing his temper. The confession echoed off the canyon walls. It is progress. Do you think the railroad cares about a few savages and some muddy holes in the ground? I am building the future, and I paid $5,000 to ensure that future is not derailed by a sentimental old fool and his charity case.
He admitted it,
Tobias whispered in the rocks above.
Loud and clear,
Maria murmured, adjusting her grip on her shotgun.
Kai exhaled. The trap was sprung. The crime was spoken.
Now came the war. Give me the envelope. Crow snarled, extending his hand. Now, or the girl bleeds. He pulled a knife from his belt and pressed it against Najoni's arm. Eliza gasped.
No!
Kai did not wait. He saw the glint of steel against Najoni's skin.
He fired.
The shot was not aimed at Crow. It was aimed at the wheel of the wagon behind him. The heavy lead slugs shattered the wooden spokes with a deafening crack. The wagon lurched. The horses panicked and reared, screaming. In the confusion, Crow flinched, the knife slipping away from Najoni. Run, Najoni! Kai roared from the cliffs, his voice thundering like a god of the mountain. The little girl dropped to the ground and scrambled toward Eliza. It is an ambush, one of the riders shouted, drawing his pistol. Gunfire erupted from 3 sides. Tobias laid down a suppressing fire near the rider's feet, kicking up spurts of red dust. Maria's shotgun boomed. Taking the hat off the second rider, they were shooting to disarm, to terrify, to control. But Crow was not panicked. He was cornered. He grabbed Najoni by her hair as she tried to crawl away, hauling her back up. He raised his revolver, aiming not at the hidden shooters, but at the child. Stop or I kill her! Crow screamed. The shooting stopped instantly. Silence crashed back into the canyon, heavy and suffocating. Kai stood up from behind the rocks, exposing himself. He held his rifle high, but he could not shoot. Crow was using Najoni as a human shield. Drop the gun! Savage! Crow yelled, sweat slicking his face. And you, girl, bring me that envelope. Eliza looked at Kai. He was 50 yards away. Helpless, she looked at Najoni, whose eyes were wide with terror. Eliza made her choice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the red wax envelope. Here, Eliza shouted, holding it up. Take it. Just let her go. She walked toward Crow. She did not walk with fear. She walked with a mother's fury. Toss it, Crow ordered. Eliza threw the envelope. It landed in the dust between them. Crow's greed overcame his caution. He shoved Najoni aside, sending the child sprawling into the dirt, and lunged for the packet. Now! Eliza screamed. She did not run away. She ran forward. She threw herself over Najoni's small body just as Crow's men opened fire. A bullet tore through the sleeve of Eliza's dress, grazing her upper arm. She felt a searing line of fire, but she did not flinch. She curled around the child, a human shield of soft flesh and iron will. Mama! Najoni shrieked. Kai was moving before the echo of the shot faded. He slid down the scree slope, a landslide of stone and fury. He fired from the hip, hitting the gunman in the shoulder. Crow snatched up the envelope. He looked at the chaos around him. He knew he could not escape with the paper. If he was caught with it, he hanged. If he destroyed it, he lived to lie another day. He pulled a box of lucifer matches from his vest, struck one against his boot, and held it to the wax seal. "No!" Kai shouted, sprinting across the canyon floor. The dry paper caught instantly. The flame licked up the side of the envelope. Eliza saw the fire. She saw the proof of their struggle, the only thing that could save the land, turning to ash. She did not think. She rolled off Najoni and lunged. "Eliza, no!" Kai screamed. She threw herself at Crow's feet, plunging her hands into the burning paper. She grabbed the charred remains, smothering the flames against the dirt, ignoring the heat that blistered her palms. Crow kicked at her, his boot connecting with her ribs. Eliza groaned, curling around the smoldering documents, protecting them with her life. Crow raised his gun to finish her. A shadow fell over him. Kai hit him like a freight train. There was no technique in the tackle, only the raw, kinetic force of a man defending his heart. They crashed into the dirt, rolling over and over. Crow's gun went off, the bullet biting harmlessly into the sky. Kai pinned Crow to the ground. He drew his knife, the blade glinting in the sun. He pressed the edge against Crow's throat, a single slice, and it would be over. The nightmare would end. The man who had hunted them, who had hurt the child, who had kicked the woman Kai loved, would be gone. "Do it!" Crow wheezed, blood on his teeth. "Show them what you are. A killer." Kai's hand trembled. The rage demanded blood. Every instinct he had honed as a warrior screamed to finish the enemy. "Kai." Eliza's voice cut through the red haze. She was sitting up, clutching the half-burned envelope to her chest. Her arm was bleeding, her face smeared with soot and dust. "Do not," she gasped. "We are not him. We are not him." Kai froze. He looked at Eliza. He saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of Crow, but fear for Kai's soul. She did not want a killer. She wanted a man. Kai took a shuddering breath. He looked down at Crow. "You are not worth the stain on my blade," Kai snarled. He pulled the knife back and slammed the heavy brass pommel into Crow's temple. Crow went limp, his eyes rolling back in his head. Kai stood up, his chest heaving. He turned to Eliza. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her injuries. "Eliza," he choked out. "You foolish, brave woman. You jumped into the fire." "I saved it," she whispered, opening her blackened hands to reveal the document. The edges were burnt, the wax melted, but the signatures, Crow's and Sterling's, were intact. "I saved it." "You could have died," Kai said, his voice cracking. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The warrior who had faced down an army was trembling like a leaf because he had almost lost her. "Do not ever do that again." "I had to," she said, leaning against him, the pain in her arm dull compared to the warmth of his embrace. "It is our future." Suddenly, the sound of galloping horses thundered from the canyon entrance. "Federal marshals," a voice boomed. "Drop your weapons." A dozen riders swept into the clearing, dust billowing around them. They wore badges. At their head was a man with a gray mustache and a hard face. Marshal Bass. Kai stiffened. He slowly raised his hands. Tobias and Maria emerged from the rocks, their weapons lowered. Marshal Bass rode up, his pistol trained squarely on Kai. "Kai Bigay," the marshal said sternly. "I have a warrant for your arrest for kidnapping and theft." Crow, groggy and bleeding, stirred on the ground. "He attacked me!" Crow shouted, trying to sit up. "He tried to kill me! He kidnapped the girl!" The marshal looked at Kai. "Get on your knees, son!" Kai did not move. He stood between the lawman and Eliza. "I will not kneel," Kai said steadily, "and I did not kidnap anyone." "Marshal,"
Eliza called out. She struggled to her feet, clutching the charred papers. "I am Eliza Hart, and this man saved my life." She walked forward, limping slightly. She held the papers up like a shield. "This is not a kidnapping," Eliza said, her voice ringing with authority. "This is a crime scene, and that man," she pointed a shaking finger at Crow, "is the criminal."
"She is lying," Crow spat. "She is his whore, she—"
"Be silent," the marshal snapped at Crow. He looked at Eliza. He saw the blood on her arm. He saw the soot on her face. And he saw the terrifying resolve in her eyes.
"What do you have there, ma'am?"
the marshal asked. "Evidence," Eliza said. "Proof that Silas Crow bribed Captain Sterling $5,000 to steal the Navajo water rights. Proof that he hired men to kill us to keep it quiet. We heard him confess. Tobias heard him. Maria heard him."
"We heard him. Marshal,"
Tobias said, stepping forward.
"Clear as a church bell."
The marshal looked at the papers Eliza handed him. He read the charred page. He saw the signatures. He looked at the number $5,000. He looked at Crow. The color drained from the trader's face. Slowly, the marshal lowered his gun. He holstered it. He turned his horse toward Crow.
"Silas Crow,"
Marshal Bass said, his voice heavy with contempt.
"You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and the attempted murder of a federal witness." "Ah! You cannot do this!"
Crow screamed as two deputies hauled him up and clamped irons on his wrists.
"I own this town, I know senators."
"You can tell them all about it in Santa Fe," the marshal said. "Get him out of my sight." The deputies dragged Crow away. The tension in the canyon broke, leaving only the sound of the wind and the sobbing of a child. Eliza turned. Najoni was standing a few feet away, tears streaming down her dusty face. "Liza," the girl hiccuped. Eliza dropped to her knees, opening her arms, ignoring the pain in her wound. "Come here, baby," Eliza whispered. Najoni ran into her arms, hitting her with the force of a cannonball. Eliza held her tight, rocking back and forth. "Mama," Najoni sobbed into Eliza's neck. "Mama, Mama." It was the first time the word had been used as a claim, not a question. Kai stood watching them. His hands hung by his sides, still stained with the dust of the fight. He saw the white woman, battered and bleeding, holding his niece as if she were her own flesh and blood. He saw the way Najoni clung to her. He looked at his own hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that everything had changed. He was no longer just a scout. He was no longer just a survivor. He walked over to them. He knelt down, encompassing them both in his shadow. Eliza looked up at him over Najoni's head. Her eyes were tired, filled with pain, but they were shining. "We did it," she whispered. Kai reached out and gently touched the bandage on her arm, then brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek. "You did it," Kai said softly. "You fought for us." He looked at the marshal, who was watching them with a strange expression, perhaps respect, perhaps just weariness. "Is it over?" Eliza asked. Kai looked at the empty canyon where Crow had been dragged away. He looked at the sun, now fully risen, bathing the red rocks in a light that was no longer angry, but golden and warm. "The fight is over," Kai said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the living is just starting." He helped them stand. Eliza leaned on him, her weight heavy against his side, fitting there as if she had been carved to match him. Najoni held his hand and Eliza's hand, linking them into a chain that no law, no wind, and no fire could break. Together, they turned and walked toward the waiting horses, leaving the ruins and the ghosts behind them. The fever came upon Eliza not like a fire, but like a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was the aftermath of the river's icy grip and the graze of the bullet, compounded by days of terror and exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the standoff at the canyon evaporated, leaving her body defenseless against the shock. She drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. She was no longer in the canyon, but she was not in Philadelphia either. She was suspended in a warm, dark place that smelled of dried sage, wood smoke, and strong coffee. Every time she surfaced from the dark waters of her fever, he was there. Kai Bige sat by the bedside, a silent sentinel carved from mahogany and worry. He did not hover, but his presence filled the small room in Maria's adobe cabin. Eliza would wake to the sensation of a cool, damp cloth being pressed against her forehead. She would feel strong, rough hands lifting her head, guiding a tin cup of willow bark tea to her cracked lips. "Drink," his voice would rumble, low and steady, a sound that vibrated in her chest even when her mind could not grasp the meaning of the words. She drank, she slept, she healed. On the third morning, the fever broke. Eliza woke to the sound of a rooster crowing in the yard and a square of bright, hard sunlight falling across the quilt. She blinked, her eyes feeling gritty but clear. She tried to sit up, and a sharp pain flared in her upper arm. But it was a manageable pain, the ache of mending flesh. She looked around. The room was simple whitewashed walls, a crucifix over the door, bundles of drying herbs hanging from the rafters. And in the corner, sitting on a wooden chair with his back to the wall, was Kai. He was asleep. It was the first time she had seen him unguarded. His hat was on his knee, his head tipped back against the plaster. The deep lines of tension around his mouth had smoothed out, making him look younger, less like a weapon and more like a man. Eliza watched him for a long time. She remembered the canyon. She remembered the fire. She remembered him tackling Silas Crow, choosing mercy over murder because she had asked him to. As if sensing her gaze, Kai's eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess. He went from asleep to alert in the span of a heartbeat. His dark eyes locked onto hers. And for a second, she saw a flash of naked relief before the mask of the stoic scout slid back into place. "You are back," Kai said. His voice was raspy with fatigue. "I think so," Eliza whispered. Her throat felt like she had swallowed sand. Kai stood up and moved to the small iron stove in the corner. He poured water from a kettle into a basin and brought it to the bedside. He moved with a careful, deliberate slowness, as if he were afraid his own strength might shatter the fragile peace of the room. "Maria says the infection is gone," Kai said, dipping a cloth into the water and wringing it out. "But you lost blood. You are weak." He held out the cloth. He did not wipe her face. He waited. Eliza reached out with her good hand and took the cloth. Their fingers brushed a fleeting contact of calloused skin against pale fingertips. A spark, distinct and electric, jumped between them. Kai pulled his hand back quickly, as if he had been burned. "Thank you," Eliza said, wiping the sleep from her eyes. "I have made broth," Kai said, turning back to the stove. "You need to eat." He brought her a bowl. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He fed her the first few spoonfuls, his hand steady, his eyes focused on the spoon. Not her face. He was nursing her with the same terrifying competence he applied to tracking deer or fighting men. But there was a clumsiness to it, a hesitation. He was terrified of breaking her. "Kai," Eliza said softly, after she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "You stayed," she said. "I said I would," Kai replied simply. "I do not break my word." "You haven't slept," she observed, noting the red rims of his eyes. "I slept enough." He lied. He set the bowl down on the floor. "The marshal has taken Crow to Santa Fe. The judge there is a hard man, but he hates corruption more than he hates Indians. Crow will not be back." "And the town?" Eliza asked. "What do they say?" Kai's face hardened slightly. "They say many things. Some say you are a hero. Some say you are a fool for trusting a savage. It does not matter what they say. The water is safe. That is what matters." He stood up, putting distance between them. He walked to the window and looked out at the dusty street of the small settlement.
There is a stagecoach leaving for the east in 3 days, Kai said, his back to her. It goes to St. Louis. From there, you can take the train to Philadelphia. Eliza felt a cold stone drop into her stomach. You want me to leave? Kai gripped the window frame. It is not about what I want. It is about what is safe. You saw what happened. This land, it eats people. Eliza, it is violent and hard. You have a life in the East. You have a profession. You should go back to it. I have nothing in the East, Eliza said, her voice rising. I told you, I was the leftover child. No one is waiting for me there. You are not a leftover here, Kai said, turning around. His eyes burned with an intensity that took her breath away. You are the woman who walked into fire. You are the woman who brought a corrupt kingdom to its knees. You could be anything you want. You could find a husband who can give you a house with glass windows and a garden. A man who does not have a price on his head every other week. Is that what you think I want? Eliza asked, pushing herself up against the pillows. Glass windows. I think you deserve peace, Kai said roughly. And I cannot give you peace. I am a man of the border. My life is dirt and blood and wind. I have a niece to raise who will always be looked at with suspicion. I cannot ask you to carry that load. You are not asking, Eliza said. I am choosing. The door opened, interrupting them. Nijoni burst into the room, followed by Maria, the stout Mexican midwife who carried a basket of laundry. Liza! Nijoni shrieked. The little girl scrambled onto the bed, mindful of Eliza's bandaged arm, but desperate for contact. She buried her face in Eliza's stomach. Gentle little bird, Kai warned, stepping forward. It is all right, Eliza said, stroking the child's raven-black hair. I am not made of glass. Kai. Maria chuckled, setting the basket down. She has been asking every hour if you were awake. I told her the white lady is tough as old leather, just prettier. Maria looked at Kai, then at Eliza. She saw the tension in the room, the unspoken words hanging in the air like smoke. She smiled, a knowing expression on her weathered face. The town is changing its tune, Maria said, wiping her hands on her apron. Yesterday, the blacksmith, Tobias, he told the preacher what you did, how you stood in front of the gun. Now the women in the market, they stop spitting when I mention your name. They ask if you need blankets, if you need tea. They feel guilty, Kai muttered. Guilt is a start, Maria said. It is better than hate. She looked at Eliza. Dr. Thorne's house, the one Crow boarded up. The sheriff tore the boards down this morning. He said it belongs to the daughter. It is a mess, but the roof is good. Eliza looked at Maria. My father's house. It is yours now, Maria said, if you want it. Eliza looked at Kai. He was staring at the floor, his jaw set. He was giving her an out. He was offering her the stagecoach ticket to safety, expecting her to take it. He was terrified that if she stayed, he would eventually fail her, just as he had failed his sister. He saw his love as a danger to her, not a gift. Nijoni pulled back from Eliza's embrace and looked up at her with huge, dark eyes. She reached out and touched the turquoise pendant that hung around her own neck, a cheap trinket, but one she cherished. Then she touched Eliza's hand. Mama, Nijoni whispered. The word was testing the air, fragile and hopeful. You stay. The room went silent. Kai held his breath. Eliza looked at the child. Then she looked at the man standing by the window, the warrior who had carried her through the snow, who had warmed her with his own body, who had promised her every kiss but taken none. She realized then that going back to Philadelphia would be the true death. It would be a return to being a ghost in a crowded city. Here, amidst the dust and the danger, she was real. Nijoni, Eliza said, her voice clear and strong. I am not going anywhere. Kai's head snapped up. I have a house to fix, Eliza continued, looking straight at him. And I have a daughter to teach how to read, and
I believe I have a very stubborn man to convince that he is not as scary as he thinks he is." Najoni squealed and hugged her again. Maria laughed, clapping her hands, but Kai did not smile. He looked at her with a mixture of wonder and terror. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion, and turned back to the window. But Eliza saw his hand come up to touch his chest, right over his heart, as if he needed to make sure it was still beating inside his ribs. That evening, the air turned cool, carrying the scent of piñon smoke from the village fires. Maria had taken Najoni to the kitchen to make tortillas, leaving Eliza and Kai alone on the small porch of the cabin. Eliza sat in a rocking chair. Wrapped in the blanket Kai's mother had woven, Kai sat on the steps, whittling a piece of cedar wood with his knife. He was carving a small horse for Najoni. "You are stubborn," Kai said, not looking up from the wood. "I have been told," Eliza replied. "It is a requirement for surviving in this territory, isn't it?" Kai stopped carving. He blew the shavings off the wood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He held it in his closed fist for a moment, then stood up and walked over to her. "I found this in the canyon," Kai said, "years ago, near the place where the water comes out of the rock." He opened his hand. On his palm lay a piece of raw turquoise. It was not polished or set in silver. It was a rough nugget, blue as the summer sky, veined with a spider web of black matrix. It looked ancient and enduring. "Among my people," Kai said, his voice low. "Turquoise is the stone of the sky and the water. It protects against evil. It binds the spirit to the land." He offered it to her. "If you stay, you will need protection. The spirits here are old, and they do not know you yet." Eliza took the stone. It was cool and heavy in her hand. It felt like a piece of the earth itself. "It is beautiful," she whispered. She looked at Kai, then at the door where Najoni's laughter drifted out. "Help me up," Eliza said. Kai reached out and took her hand, pulling her gently from the chair. She stood close to him, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. She did not let go of the stone. "I do not need it for myself," Eliza said. She turned toward the door. "Najoni, come here, please." The little girl ran out, flour dusting her nose. "Yes, Mama." Eliza knelt down, wincing slightly as her knees hit the wooden boards. She held up the stone. "Kai gave this to me," Eliza said, "to protect us. But a family is like a chain. If one link is strong, the whole chain holds." She took a leather thong from her pocket, one she had used to tie her hair back, and wrapped it around the rough stone. She tied it around Najoni's small wrist. "There," Eliza said, tightening the knot. "Now we are tied together. You, me, and Kai. The stone binds us." Najoni looked at the bracelet, her eyes shining. She looked at Kai. "Uncle, look. We are a chain." Kai looked at the stone on the child's wrist, then at Eliza kneeling in the dust. His throat worked. He had tried to give her a gift of farewell, a token of protection for a woman he thought he couldn't keep. Instead, she had used it to bind herself to him and the child permanently. She had taken his symbol of the dying soul and made herself part of it. "Go help Maria," Eliza said, kissing Najoni's forehead. The girl ran back inside. Eliza stood up. She was close to him now, very close. She could smell the soap he had used to wash, the leather of his vest, the scent of the wind that clung to him. Kai did not move back. He stood like a man facing a firing squad, trembling with the effort of holding his ground. "You kept your promise," Eliza said softly. Kai looked down at her. "Which one?" "In the cave," she said. "When I was cold, when I was naked and afraid, you said every kiss would be mine, but only if I asked." Kai's eyes darkened. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. He did not touch her. His hands were clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to pull her against him. "I remember," he rasped. "I am not cold anymore, Kai," Eliza said. She took a step closer, closing the final inch between them. Her chest brushed against his vest. "And I am not afraid." She reached up. Her hand, the one that had held the burning paper, cupped his jaw. Her fingers traced the sharp line of his cheekbone. "I am asking," she whispered. Kai let out a sound that was half groan, half prayer. The restraint snapped, not into violence, but into a desperate, overwhelming tenderness. He lowered his head. He gave her time to pull away, hovering just a breath from her lips. When she did not move, when she tilted her head back to meet him, he closed the distance. It was not the rough, demanding kiss of a man claiming a prize. It was the devout, terrifyingly gentle kiss of a man who has been given a grace he does not believe he deserves. His lips were warm and firm. He tasted of coffee and longing. Eliza sighed into the kiss, her arm winding around his neck, pulling him closer. She felt his hands come up, large and trembling, to frame her face, holding her as if she were made of holy water. For a moment, the world of dust and guns and corrupt traders fell away. There was only the twilight, the scent of cedar, and the slow, deep rhythm of two lonely hearts finally beating in sync. When they broke apart, breathless, Kai rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed. "Everyone," he whispered, repeating the vow, "for the rest of my life. Everyone is yours." Eliza smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "I intend to collect on that debt, Mr. Bigay." The next morning, the air was crisp and clear. The stagecoach for the east arrived, changed horses, and left. Eliza's heart was not on it. Instead, she stood in the small room at the back of the trading post, the room Silas Crow had locked her in just a week ago. The door was open now. The sunlight streamed in. The leather trunk sat open on the floor. It was battered, the leather stained by river water and scarred by the rocks of the canyon. Eliza knelt beside it. It was empty. The dresses were ruined, the books swollen with water, the medical supplies largely used up. The space where the map had been hidden was just a torn seam in the velvet. It had been a trap. It had been a burden. It had been the coffin of her old life. Now it was just a box, and a box was useful. Eliza reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small, fresh ledger she had bought from the general store with her remaining coins. On the cover, she had written in neat script, "Eliza Bigay School and Infirmary." She placed the ledger in the bottom of the trunk. Next to it, she placed 3 new glass bottles, one of willow bark tincture, one of clean alcohol, and one of bright yellow arnica flowers steeping in oil, a remedy Maria had taught her just that morning. She looked at the trunk. It was no longer filled with the secrets of a dead man. It was filled with the tools of a living woman. She heard heavy boots on the stairs. Kai appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a clean shirt, his hair tied back neatly. He looked at her, and the ghost of a smile, rare and beautiful, touched his lips. "The wagon is ready," Kai said. "Najoni is already sitting in the back. She says she is driving." "Heaven help us," Eliza laughed, standing up and dusting off her hands. "Are you ready?" Kai asked. He looked at the trunk. "Do you want me to carry that?" "No," Eliza said. She reached down and grabbed the handle. It was heavy, but it was a good weight. "I can carry my own baggage." She paused, looking at him. "But I would appreciate some company on the road." "You have it," Kai said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Wherever the road goes?" Eliza walked out of the room, carrying the trunk of her future. She walked past the shadows of the past and into the bright, blinding light of the western morning, where her husband and her daughter were waiting to take her home. The seasons in the high desert did not change with a whisper. They changed with the shifting of the wind. 1 year had passed since the fire and the blood in the Canyon of the Dead. The winter snows had melted into the spring torrents, feeding the aquifers that lay deep beneath the red earth. And now the summer sun was baking the clay into hard, cracked tiles. But this year the water was running,
at the base of the Red Cliffs, where Silas Crow had once erected illegal fences and posted armed guards. The stream flowed clear and cold. Sheep, their wool thick and dusty, dipped their heads to drink. Dine women filled clay jars without fear of a rifle shot ringing out from the ridge. The barbed wire had been torn down, coiled like rusted snakes and thrown into a ravine, a monument to a greed that had been broken by the truth. Eliza Hart stood in the doorway of her schoolhouse, wiping chalk dust from her hands onto her apron. It was a modest building, constructed of adobe bricks and timber, built onto the side of the old trading post that had once been a place of fear. Now, it was a place of noise. Inside, a dozen children were gathering their slates. Some were the children of settlers, miners, and ranchers who had come west for silver and grass. Others were dine, their hair tied back with wool, their eyes dark and watchful. A year ago, these children would never have sat in the same room. Today, they were learning that the letter W stood for water, and that water belonged to everyone. "Class is dismissed," Eliza announced, her voice ringing clear over the scraping of wooden chairs. "Remember, tomorrow we practice our numbers, and Mr. Thomas, if you pull Najoni's braid again, you will be scrubbing the floorboards." A freckled boy turned red and muttered an apology. Najoni, now 7 years old and taller, with a missing front tooth and a spirit that seemed to vibrate with energy, skipped up to the desk. She wore a dress of calico print, but over it, she wore a traditional velvet blouse, and on her wrist, tied with a leather thong, was the piece of raw turquoise. "Mama," Najoni said, the word slipping from her tongue as easily as breathing. "Is Uncle Kai back yet?" Eliza looked out the window toward the southern road. The heat haze shimmered on the horizon, blurring the shapes of the mesas. "Not yet, little bird," Eliza said, fighting down the familiar pang of worry. "The ride from Santa Fe is long. He said 3 days." "He will bring candy," Najoni declared with absolute certainty, "and paper for you." "I hope he brings himself," Eliza murmured. "That is enough for me." She ushered the children out, watching them scatter like quail into the late afternoon light. The settlement had grown, with the water rights secured and the corruption of Captain Sterling exposed. Honest families had started to drift in. There was a blacksmith shop where Tobias hammered iron with a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. There was a general store run by a widow from Ohio who didn't cheat the Indians on the price of flour. And there was peace. It was a fragile thing, maintained by vigilance, but it was there. Silas Crow was gone. The trial in Santa Fe had been the talk of the territory for months. The diary Eliza had saved from the fire, combined with the testimony of Kai and the other witnesses, had been enough to hang a dozen men. Crow had escaped the noose only by turning state's evidence against his backers in the railroad company, but he had not escaped justice. He was rotting in the territorial prison in Yuma, breaking rocks in the sun, a place where no amount of money could buy a drop of water. Eliza stepped off the porch and walked toward the small garden she had planted on the side of the house. Corn, beans, and squash. The 3 sisters grew together in the dine style, thriving in the irrigated soil. She knelt to check a tomato plant, her fingers brushing the green leaves. She was different now. The pale, terrified woman who had stepped off the stagecoach clutching a trunk of secrets was gone. Her skin was bronzed by the sun. Her hands were calloused from work, and her eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had looked death in the face and not blinked. She heard the sound before she saw him. It was the rhythmic thud of hooves, steady and unhurried. Eliza stood up, shading her eyes. A rider was coming up the road. He sat tall in the saddle, moving with the horse as if they were one creature. He wore a dusty vest over a white shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare. "Kai," she whispered. She did not run. She walked to the gate, her heart picking up a rhythm that beat against her ribs like a drum. Kai Bigay pulled his horse to a halt. He looked tired. The dust of the trail coated his shoulders. and there were new lines around his eyes etched by the glare of the sun. But when he saw her, the weariness seemed to drop away. He swung down from the saddle, his boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud. He tied the reins to the post and turned to her. "You are late," Eliza said, though she could not keep the smile from her lips. "The mud near the river was deep," Kai said, "and the judge likes the sound of his own voice." "Did it go well?" Eliza asked, searching his face. Kai nodded. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rolled document tied with a ribbon. "The deed," he said. "The land around the spring is officially designated as a protected trust. No one can fence it. No one can sell it. It belongs to the people. Forever." Eliza let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a year. "It is done, then." "It is done," Kai said. He did not hand her the paper. Instead, he tossed it onto the bench on the porch. He stepped closer to her. He did not look like the wild scout who had threatened to leave her in the desert. He looked like a man who had learned that words could be as sharp as knives, and that the law, when wielded by a just hand, could cut deeper than any blade. "Where is Najoni?" Kai asked. "She is—" "Uncle!" A streak of color shot out from the side of the house. Najoni launched herself at Kai, burying her face in his dusty coat. Kai caught her, lifting her effortlessly into the air. "You have grown," he grunted, swinging her around. "Did you eat rocks while I was gone?" "I ate beans," Najoni giggled. "Did you bring it?" Kai set her down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paper sack. "Peppermint sticks. Do not tell Maria, or she will say I am rotting your teeth." Najoni grabbed the bag and ran off to share her treasure with the neighbor's children, her laughter trailing behind her like a kite tail. Kai watched her go, a softness in his eyes that only his family ever saw. Then he turned back to Eliza. "And for you," Kai said, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a small glass vial. It was blue, filled with a clear liquid. "Lavender oil," he said, "from a trader in Santa Fe. I remembered you said the smell reminded you of, before." Eliza took the vial. She unstoppered it and inhaled. The scent was sweet and floral, a memory of a polite, ordered world she had left behind. But as she stood there, smelling the lavender, she realized it no longer smelled like home. Home smelled of sagebrush, horse sweat, and the man standing in front of her. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is lovely." She put the vial in her pocket. "Come, I have a stew on the fire. You look like you could eat a buffalo." That evening, after the dishes were washed and Najoni had been tucked into her bed in the loft, the silence of the high desert settled over the house. It was a comfortable silence, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant call of a coyote. Eliza walked out onto the wooden porch. The sun had set, leaving streaks of indigo and violet across the western sky. The air was cooling rapidly, carrying the scent of dry grass and cooling earth. Kai was sitting on the top step, leaning against the post. He was whittling again, a habit he found soothing. This time, he was carving a small bird. Eliza sat down beside him. She did not speak. She simply leaned her shoulder against his arm. Kai stopped carving. He looked out at the darkening landscape. "I saw a train in Santa Fe," Kai said quietly. It was heading east. It had plush seats, velvet curtains, dining cars with white tablecloths. Eliza looked at his profile. "That sounds very fancy." "It goes all the way to Philadelphia," Kai said. "In 5 days." He turned to look at her. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his eyes caught the last light of the day. "The agent at the station said they are looking for teachers in the city." Kai said, "Civilized places, brick schools, paved streets." Eliza sighed. She reached out and took the knife from his hand, setting it on the step. Then she took the piece of wood. "Why do you do this, Kai Bege?" she asked gently. "Every few months, you try to give me a way out. Do you want me to leave?" "No," Kai said,
the word escaping him like a groan. "I never want you to leave, but I look at your hands." He reached out and took her hand. He ran his thumb over her palm. It was rough now, stained with ink and garden soil. "These hands were made for silk and books," Kai said. "Now they are covered in the dust of my country. I look at you, and I wonder if I am selfish, if I am keeping you in a hard place because I am too weak to let you go." Eliza closed her fingers around his hand. She squeezed it hard. "Look at me," she commanded. Kai met her gaze. "Do you remember the river?" Eliza asked. "Do you remember the cold?" "I remember every second," Kai said. "You saved me from the water," Eliza said. "But you did not save me from the world. I chose this world. Kai, I chose it when I walked into the fire to grab those papers. I chose it when I opened the school. And I choose it every morning when I wake up and see the sun hit those red rocks." She leaned closer to him. "I am not a prisoner here," she whispered. "I am a pioneer, and I am a mother, and I am a woman who loves a stubborn, foolish warrior." Kai stared at her. The fear that lived in the back of his mind, the fear that she would one day wake up and realize she had made a mistake, began to recede, pushed back by the absolute certainty in her voice. "You could have an easier life," Kai murmured. "I do not want an easy life," Eliza said. "I want a life that means something. I want this life with you." The wind shifted, rustling the leaves of the cottonwood tree by the creek. It was the sound of the land breathing. Kai turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. The fit was perfect copper skin against pale, strength against resilience. "Then stay," Kai said. His voice was rough with emotion. "Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you are ours. Stay with us, Eliza. Be part of this land. Be part of me." Eliza smiled. It was a smile that started in her eyes and lit up her entire face. "I thought you would never ask," she said. She leaned in. She did not rush. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of the turning seasons. Kai went still. He remembered the promise he had made in the cave. A year ago, "Every kiss will be yours, but you must ask." He waited, his heart thundering against his ribs. Eliza brought her face close to his. She could feel the warmth of his skin. She could see the pulse beating in his throat. She closed the distance. She kissed him. It was a slow, warm kiss. It tasted of the journey they had shared, of the bitter cold of the river, the smoke of the campfires, the fear of the chase, and the sweet, hard-won peace of the arrival. It was a kiss that held no hesitation. It was an affirmation, a claiming. Kai's arms came around her, pulling her off the step and into his lap. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a shifting world. He kissed her back with a hunger he had suppressed for a year, pouring all his gratitude, all his worship, and all his love into the contact. They sat there for a long time as the stars came out one by one over the vast desert sky. The wind blew through the canyon, carrying the scent of dry grass and the promise of rain. Behind them, the door to the house was open. Hanging in the doorway, acting as a curtain against the night chill, was an old wool blanket. It was woven with the patterns of the dying red for the earth, black for the night, white for the dawn. It was frayed at the edges and had been mended in a dozen places with bright yellow thread. It was not a perfect blanket. It was old, it was scarred, but it was warm, and it was strong. Inside, Najoni slept, safe and dreaming. Outside, the railroad tracks still hummed with the passage of trains carrying strangers to new lives. Men would come and go. Greed would rise and fall. The world would change. But on the porch of the adobe house, under the watchful gaze of the indifferent stars, Eliza and Kai sat wrapped in each other's arms. They had found their place. They had fought for it with blood and words. And now, they would keep it with a love. They were home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope the journey of Eliza, Kai, and little Najoni touched your heart as much as it did mine writing it.
It is a story about finding family in the most unexpected places and having the courage to fight for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and tell me, where are you listening to this story from? Are you in a busy city dreaming of the open plains? Or are you already out in the country? Let's share our stories in the comments. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button and press hype to help this story reach more people who love a good Western romance. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring more of these adventures to life. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.